Climate change is not a distant threat. Before we used to hear it, oh, it's very far, but now we know that it is here and it is here with us, affecting lives and livelihood across our nation in different forms. Climate justice is not just an environmental issue, it is a matter of social equity and human rights. The consequences of climate change disproportionately affect vulnerable communities and marginalized populations, amplifying existing inequalities. As we strive to create a sustainable future, we must remember that climate justice demands that no one is left behind. No one is left behind. The vulnerable communities, women, children, people living with disabilities, and so on, we must carry everybody along because it's very, very important that we don't leave anyone behind. In every corner of our country, communities are facing the impact of extreme weather events, from rising sea levels. Those of us who live in the coastline areas or have been to the coastline areas, we will be able to be witness of this. And it's causing coastal erosion. I saw videos and pictures of Olumide the other time in Ayetoro, where he went to see some of those things that are happening. For those of us who are in Lagos, we know what is happening as well. And the coastal communities along the 852 kilometers of our coastline, we know what is happening. And when you talk about the northern part of the country, the encroaching desert that we have. So these are realities that we face as a nation and as a people. So we need to come together to ensure that we are able to fight this thing. But as we gather here today, we also find hope. Hope in the power of collective action and the potential for transformative change.
When I made a comment the other time that somebody said the conservationists are the people that are against development because we want them to keep the forest and we don't want them to build buildings like this and skyscrapers. And so they said we are against development. So I smiled that day. I still remember many years back. I smiled that day, and of course I wasn't angry with the person. I said it is his level of understanding. And today everybody knows. You don't even need science to come and prove to you that there is environmental issues again. I won't be surprised if that same person has become an environmental activist today. Just transition and collaboration. It's very important. No man is an island. And when we go to communities, I always tell them, when they say, when I'm making presentation to them, say, so what is your own? From all the way from Abuja, you are coming to Bumaji community, for example, to come and tell us about environmental issues. I tell them environment does not have boundary. We are the one that creates political boundary and we say this is Abuja, this is FCT, this is Lagos State, this is Ogun State. When you step from Ogun State and enter Lagos State, for example, environmental issues does not understand what you are talking about. They move. One time like this, there was a time that they got something from the ocean in Nigeria here. And by the time they looked at this item and really reviewed it, they discovered that it came from another country entirely, from the end of the other side of the ocean. So it is justice and collaboration because nobody can actually address these things. And one of the pillars, one of the important things about the GEF is that whereas the full size and the medium size, they address policy issues, they address government issues, they address national issues. But the small grants was created such that even communities who cannot write those grandeur proposals to be able to be funded by the full size of the GEF can also participate in environmental issues.
We also know that recently the Ministry of Petroleum and the NNPC, have taken some steps on addressing issues of gas flaring and methane abatement and so on. And over the last 1 year and a half, we know that there have been a lot of efforts at developing an energy transition plan by Nigeria. So these are all good things in terms of policy, but one of the areas that we have observed which for us is a big gap is that in all these processes, is how citizens broadly, and particularly communities whose lives and livelihoods have been greatly impacted by climate, and especially in the area of natural resources, their involvement and participation in these processes. And so over the last 2 years, what we have been trying to do is to see how we can support initiatives to make sure that citizens' voices are also central to all these conversations, and that, especially for those who are being impacted directly, are involved in these processes. So when NCF reached out to us with this initiative, we were very glad to support. So I'm here this morning to say that we are very happy to be part of this, and we look forward to working with them, including all other development partners and donors who will come on board on this. The last bit is what the Director General said about citizens' voices in the big conversations, both at the country level but also internationally. We just had COP27 pass, and COP28 is coming. The question is, what is the collective citizens' voice around these issues? And I think that this is very timely. This meeting is very timely to help work with others to make sure that, in COP28, there will be a very strong voice by civil society from Nigeria, and hopefully across the region, to be able to ensure that the commitments that our governments make are really grounded in the reality of people's lives. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so the Nigerian Climate Justice Alliance is an alliance that we want to bring many CSOs together, if possible, all CSOs working on the climate change space in Nigeria, so that we'll have one voice to be able to project the issues of climate justice. As I said in my opening speech, climate justice is actually human. It has to do with human rights. It's not just about environment alone. It has to do also with human rights. And that is why there's a need for us to project it. Because whatever happens to the climate affects the dignity of humankind. And that's why we need to look at it from that. So one person pushing an agenda may not be as strong as a coalition of voices coming together. And that is why this alliance is very important. You see, the issue of climate change has to do with everybody. There are naysayers, there are people who are disputing it, there are people who are denying it, there are people who are facing the real situation of climate change, the impact of climate change. So everybody has to be involved in this, not just the government, not just individuals, not just community, but everybody has to be involved in it. So that is why we want to create this awareness. It's part of creating the awareness. On one hand, advocating, on one hand, also pushing, so that policies that the government will make will be able to help to promote the issues of climate change because of the impact that it's having. We're seeing some of this impact, and they're not isolated. Some of the climate impact has implications in terms of human health. It has implications in terms of the environment. It has implications even in terms of food security. So we have to look at it from all areas, from all angles. So it's all multidimensional that we have to look at it. So everybody's involved.
Well, of course, everybody, I always tell people now that you don't even need this a research scientist to come and tell you that climate change is changing. It's impacting on us negatively. So, but again, I want you to appreciate the size of Nigeria. Nigeria, in Africa, for example, out of every 4 African, 1 is a Nigerian. So we have enormous human resources that it will take us like 4 times any other nation to be able to get the message across to people and to create awareness and empowerment that we need to address climate issues. If you saw from my presentation, I even mentioned that 65% of our beneficiaries are women, because it's not because, definitely, of course, we know the gender issues that is in the public domain that we are discussing about. But even when you get to the communities, you discover that it is the women that are being impacted more. I was in a community in Benue State, for example, and the women and the girls have to use the wheelbarrow to go and look for water in the next community. Most times they will sleep over because the other community will tell them, let us fetch our own water first before you fetch your own. So they sleep over. That will affect their school, that will affect their feeding, that will affect their normal life. So we know that women are more impacted by climate issues than other gender. And because of that, of course, when we get there, we try to see what we can do. Because again, empowerment, awareness creation and empowerment is important.
Well, actually, Nigeria has gone ahead to have a national climate change law, which is one of the most important policy frameworks. I played a very major role in designing that. Nigeria also have, of course, you know, the Federal Ministry of Environment and the Department for Climate Change. So there is a bit of a framework in place. I think also we have the national summit where we have all the ministers or several ministers come to discuss about the policies that should move Nigeria forward. So there is a number of frameworks in place. I think that the major challenge Nigeria has is actually moving from policy and policy frameworks to actual implementation. And the reason for this is partly, in many cases, that some of the policies that we have not really thought it through in terms of the actual financing, in terms of actual costing, in terms of actual monitoring, verification. And the data behind some of the policies are also weak. But behind or ahead of all of these things, what you really need is political will to drive the policies forward. Because one of the areas where Nigeria has lacked is the low, or in most cases, lack of the voice of CSOs in pushing the government, pressuring other stakeholders like businesses to do what they're supposed to do. So this workshop is extremely timely because it seeks to bring CSOs together to reinforce them, to build their capacity, to empower them, and to come up with a strategy that will help to push government to do more on both climate change and on the environmental issues. So this is really a very timely workshop.